Right, so here's another example. In this case, I have a short animation of about 30 frames with the sky render and the clouds moving. We can quickly see that animation right there, and we can also just scrub through it. 30 frames a total. And on the first frame, what I'd like to do is create this curve like so, perhaps add a few more points on it, and that's something you can do just now. You can just click those points that you already have if you want to move them around. If you are in move mode, that's the only thing it does. But if you're in plus or in add mode, the moment you click a point that's an area that's on the curve but not close to the existing points, it will insert a new point. And you can still also move the existing ones. That's the new feature here in 7.1. You can move the existing ones while you're also inserting additional points. So I have now one on each of the midpoints here. We have a little spiky corner on each side. And there's this one here, this one here on this side. Let's move these guys a little bit more inward, this one too, and then we have this. Alright. So what I'd like to do, actually, let's move these in the midpoints. There you go. So what I'd like to do is have an animation where this shape is going to change across the animation. And to do that, first of all, we set a keyframe. So we keyframe all these points by creating a keyframe like this. So we have a little highlight here indicating that there is a keyframe for that curve. And then we can go to another curve, another point, another frame along the animation, and perhaps to the last one, right here, and keyframe the same shape. Let's go do that. Keyframe that as well. So at this point the curve is not changing, but what we could do now is go to the middle, or maybe this one and then this frame as well. We'll go to two different frames somewhere halfway, like 1/3 and 2/3 into the animation, and create a different shape for this. So for this position, what I'd like to do is have this middle point go out, this one go out as well, this like so, and this like so. So we're basically changing just 4 control points along this entire curve. Let's go and create a keyframe for that. There you go. So we now have a keyframe here at the beginning, and as we're going through that, it does the interpolation and changes the curve, as you can see here, because eventually it reaches the next keyframe, the one right here. Alright, and so now next thing I'd like to do is go to about this position here, about 2/3 into the animation, and create another keyframe, and this time I'll grab these outer spikes and bring them closer to the middle. Something like so. Okay, and that, in fact, we can even move these guys out a little bit more. Perhaps adjust these outer corners, whatever you want to do here. The idea is just to get a feeling for, oh yeah, I can move these points, I can add some more. At this point I'd like to just keep working with the ones I already have and move them and transform them from one to the next sequence. So here's another keyframe. Let's go to the Roto tools and create a keyframe for that. So now we have a total of what, 4 keyframes. One here at the beginning, 1/3 into the animation, we have this one here, and then let's keep going. Around here we have another one, 2/3 into the animation, and at the end we have a last keyframe, which repeats the initial shape. So if we now play that, we'll see the curve change. And now the question is, well, what's that good for? It's a curve, okay? It's only there while we are actually looking at the tool, this particular curve tool. But we can have this rendered into a couple of ways. First of all, we can say, well, let's go render with the current fill tool. Could be a gradient, could be a plain color fill, like let's say we want to color this yellowish green, something like this. For whatever reason, you can do that, and then you can actually do that again and again, frame by frame, and fill it. But that may not be that impressive. Perhaps more interesting is using this into the alpha channel. So you could manually go do that. You can say fill it into the alpha channel, replacing it, and you now have an alpha channel, as you can see here with the marching ants going along that curve. But even better is to actually tell it to do that on the Roto tools. So you can say use the curve as an alpha. So using the curve as alpha means that it's going to render it into alpha the moment you see it, the moment you go to that frame, no matter which frame you're looking at. So you can go and scrub through that and every one of these frames, the moment it sees it, it goes to the curve and renders it into alpha. So you see the marching ants, the selection mask, changing dynamically, as if it had an animated alpha channel there. It's not actually an alpha channel that's already pre-computed. It renders it on the fly from the curve. That curve is the one that's going through some calculations as it's interpolating the control points. So every one of these points along the curve is subject to movement, and the curve changes therefore, and the alpha channel changes with it. Now, what is that good for? Well, whatever you do with the alpha, with the selection, that's what it's good for. You could do compositions. You could do something like this. If you have some image here and the other on the plane, what's that? The swap buffer. If you already had an image there, you could go and perhaps render some plasma noise there. And well, because we already have a alpha selection here, it's gonna render it only inside of that. So let's not use that example. Instead, let's go temporarily disable the alpha mode. Let's go selection and clear the alpha. So we have the curve, but we're not rendering it into the alpha right now. So instead, what we'll do is we will go to let's go to the first frame here and jump to the swap buffer and render some image. It could be, let's see, where's that render tool? There it is. Let's go and render, let's get one of those artistic weave patterns. There you go. And render that something like this size. Alright, and this could be a photograph, it could be something painted, whatever it is, but you want to only see it through the outline of that curve. This curve is going to turn into a selection mask so that you only see it inside of that, or actually outside of that. You can also have it just outside of that. And again, the way you do that now is you go to the rotor tools and you tell it, yes, let's use this as alpha. In fact, we don't need to be on the swap buffer anymore. Let's go back to the main buffer, and in the main buffer we can see the selection mask, and you could also invert it if in fact you wanted to not see the inside, because right now you can see what's the inside by storing it here. If you go to the selection menu and store alpha, you see the inside is selected. Well, instead, if you want the outside, you can invert it. You can go here and say it's inverted, so it's flagged to invert it as well after that rendering, and so we can go and select and store the alpha to see indeed that it selects the outside now. Alright, so let's say we want to keep it this way. This is the way we want it, and we want that selection from the swap buffer. We want that area from the swap buffer there. So that would be jump here. Right, so this graphic that we have on the swap buffer on the outside of the curve is what we're interested in merging and blending in, and that's what we can do quite easily now. We can go back to looking at the main buffer, and not just for the one frame, but for the entire frame sequence. I mean, here we can do it, for instance, if we're interested in just this one frame, we can do that right here on the filter, combine with swap with the alpha blade, right? And then we'll just look at the alpha buffer and say, oh, let's grab the swap buffer there. Bingo. So now the swap buffer was blended in from the background. But you could also do this in a different way, which is rather than the alpha blade, you can say let's mix the two buffers. By how much? How much from that buffer or from this buffer? Well, you can fade it all across, but it's only going to do that where the alpha channel lets it. Okay, so the selection mask in the alpha channel says nope, can't touch this area. Right, that's what this says. When it's black here, it says it's untouchable. When it's white, it's fully selected and it can modify it. So that's what you're seeing here. As you're moving the slider, the mixing of the buffer does happen, but only through the selected alpha channel. Now guess what? I'm working on one image here. How about we do this on the entire animation sequence? So we will still see the clouds, the sky animate in the inside here, but on the outside we'll see the static frame. So let's go and do that perhaps at this level. And instead of doing this manually from frame to frame, we'll just now go to the animation timeline. And in the timeline, we have a very similar tool there that we just used before, where we can combine the two buffer, the main and the swap buffer, through the alpha. There it is, transition through alpha, or this one actually, the mix buffer. And so let's go to full level, and it does that for every single frame. Every single frame, it will see that, hey, there is a curve, and it is mapped to alpha. So let's go render it into alpha. Okay, so you have a very, very complex curve that can change shape across the frame sequence because it's interpolating through the different keyframes. Let's go render that. And there we are. So now we can go back to the curve tool and say we don't need this anymore. Let's go free up all these keyframes, and we don't need to in fact keep the curve at all. Let's go delete that. Let's get out of the curve tool and let's go get rid of the alpha channel. There it is, clear, Control D, and that way we now have an animation in which the shape is changing, and that shape is what lets us see the sky that's animating behind it. And let's go and play that. So that's how that's done. You can create fairly sophisticated shapes through which the video will be rendered and blended into the other image that was in the swap buffer.